This Halloween weekend, there's nothing scary about Ivory Tower. No tricks, but we do have a treat. Some intelligent discussion about the news. That's coming up next.
This program is brought to you by the members of WCNY. Thank you.
Welcome to Ivory Tower. I'm Barbara Fote from Syracuse University. The professors on the panel tonight are Michael Tillotson from SUNY Cortland, Rick Fenner from Utica University, and Aaron Strong from Hamilton College. Early voting for local elections is underway with Election Day next Tuesday. So I've asked the panelists to brief us on some significant races. In Onondaga County, Proposition 1 asked voters to decide whether legislators' terms should go from 2 years to 4 years and then be limited to a maximum of 12 years in the job. Aaron, in general, do you think term limits are a good idea?
Term limits are a good idea, and actually they're one of the few things that have really broad bipartisan support right now. Republicans like term limits, Democrats like term limits. One of the reasons is we want to get new ideas into our county legislators, and it's really hard to challenge incumbents. 12 years is a good compromise on this. It gives enough time for a legislator to come in and really make a mark, but then we need some new ideas. I do wish that they hadn't combined the extension from 2-year terms to 4-year terms with term limits, because those are really separate issues, but the proposition you'll see if you're an Onondaga County voter does combine those together. I think having term limits is a really important thing.
Michael, how about term limits?
I like term limits because I think that being a politician is not supposed to be a lifelong pursuit. You come in with some fresh ideas and you go back to private life.
Very good. Well, Aaron, tell us also about statewide, everybody will be voting on this proposition related to Adirondack land.
So Proposition 1, this is a statewide proposition, would amend the Constitution, and this has to do with the ski area in the Adirondacks. And you might be wondering, why do we need to amend the state constitution to deal with a small amount of acreage, 300 acres of ski trails in the Adirondacks? And the reason is that Article 14 of the Constitution says that state forest preserve land must remain forever wild. Now, there was a bit of a mix-up. So when the Olympic Center, Mount Van Hoevenberg Ski Center that was used in the 1932 and 1980 Winter Olympics was built, some of the ski trails were actually built on state forest preserve land, which should have been protected. So this is retroactively amending the Constitution to permit that usage of forest preserve land for the ski areas. One of the interesting things in here is that the proposition also requires 2,500 additional acres of forested land be brought into the state forest preserve. Proposition has wide support. It's gone through both the Senate and the Assembly with only one assemblyman voting against it once it had to go through that. So it has almost unanimous support in the legislature, broad-based support from conservation groups in the Adirondacks, huge amounts of support. I highly suspect it passes, although it's worded kind of funnily. So do know that these ski trails already exist, and this is just making the ski area comply with the Constitution. These similar constitutional amendments have happened for Whiteface and Gore Mountain, Bel Air, if you've ever skied at any of those.
Rick, I know you're into sports a lot. What do you think of this proposal?
Well, as Aaron said, this is something that is fixing a slight mistake. It's unfortunate you have to go to these extents to do that, but other than that, I agree. This has very widespread support. I expect that it will pass easily.
But is this not a precedent for, okay, I'm a developer, I'll just encroach into the land and then hopefully we'll make it up?
I think what will happen is, again, this is carving out an exception for something that already happened. Could there be an incentive for someone to try to do something and then go back again and get this? I think that in today's world, with the amount of information we have, is less likely to happen. I'm not really worried about that happening with this case.
Okay, Michael, you've been looking at some governor races.
I have, broadly speaking, Barbara. I think the Democratic Party has a tremendous opportunity this cycle to not only recast their framing and their messaging, but also to develop a refreshing new operational paradigm that suits the egalitarian center. For example, I think about the New Jersey governor's race. We have Mikey Sherrill, former naval officer, former prosecutor, graduate of the Naval Academy, combat pilot. she checks a lot of centrist boxes with her messaging. She makes a lot of people comfortable, including suburban, exurban demographics. We think about the Virginia governor's race. We have Abigail Spanberger. Her father was a police officer. She worked as a postal inspector, focusing on money laundering and narcotics cases. She worked at the CIA, looking at nuclear proliferation and terrorism. She has that Beltway appeal, and the national security and law enforcement pieces in place. Both of these candidates, for me, quite possibly align with the Andy Beshear model, the centrist moderate Democrat in Kentucky, who's serving his second term in the Bluegrass state. So these are things to watch beyond what is happening in New York City with the young Democratic Socialist.
I think what's really interesting to watch in the races in New Jersey and Virginia, and particularly in New Jersey, is we saw a big rightward shift in New Jersey in the last election cycle, the presidential election, particularly among Latino voters, but really across the whole state. A lot of people moving towards Trump that, frankly, people didn't expect to move towards Trump. Now, the Democrats still carried New Jersey, but just barely, which is quite astonishing. What do we see in 2025 in this off-cycle governor's race? That'll give us a lot of information about where some of those voters who switched to Trump, where they're thinking about political parties now, especially with these centrist candidates that are there. So that's something I'll be watching on Tuesday.
Rick, is this a bellwether for the country? Can
Oh,
we go
I think
that
this
far?
really is for the Democrats, because if they underperform in both New Jersey and Virginia, even if winning, but by smaller and smaller margins, I think this is going to cause panic for 2026, definitely.
Let me go back, and it's Mikey Sherrill, Michael, and the Republican candidate is Jack Citarelli, accountant, long time, has held lots of political offices. But it's traditionally a Democratic state, but as Aaron says, could be up for grabs. How about in Virginia? Is it the lieutenant governor, I believe, is running?
The lieutenant governor has some weaknesses. She's bombastic, she's over the top, she's hyperbolic, and she makes accusatory statements that are not sometimes proven by data. So I think she has some weaknesses there.
Now, traditionally, I think I read, check me on this, that Virginia, since I wrote down 1977, always elects a party opposite the president.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, that seems to bear itself out, but we'll see how it goes this time.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Very good. Rick, how about the California proposition that's getting a lot of attention?
Right. California Proposition 50 is to counteract the gerrymandering that's been going on in red states. It reads, this authorizes the temporary changes to congressional district maps in response to Texas's partisan redistricting. I think this is regrettably the direction that blue states, such as California, and we've been talking about it in New York State as well, have to go in order not to unilaterally disarm against what's going on with Texas. In fact, if this passes in California, which I suspect it will, the redrawing of the districts will probably create 5 more Democratic seats, will just counterbalance the 5 Republican seats that are going to be gained probably in Texas. This is not good governance. I do not believe in gerrymandering, but I think it's legal. And so the Democrats at this point have to decide whether they're going to keep the high moral ground or play by the same set of rules that the Republicans are playing. And I think in the long run, they're going to have to go and do what the Republican states are doing.
I agree with you, Rick, but I think the problem here is where does this end? North Carolina just did a partisan redistricting, which is really gonna absolutely wreck their districts, particularly taking away power from black voters in North Carolina. And part of the problem here is we're slowly gutting the Voting Rights Act, right? So that Supreme Court decision after Supreme Court decision is really limiting the power of that seminal part of the Civil Rights Acts from 5 decades ago to preserve and make sure that voting is fair. Partisan gerrymandering is just going to continue and continue and continue. And barring any large-scale intervention, which I do not see where it could possibly come from, I think what California is doing makes sense right now, but it's on the path towards doing this forever and ever. It's hard to see us ever getting back from it.
But if California doesn't do this, that's not going to change what Republican states do. So I think the only solution is at the national level.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's turn to what's been big news all week. The government shut down, and that means bare cupboards in many homes. It appears, as of Friday morning when we're recording, that some 100,000 people here in central New York won't get their SNAP benefits starting on Saturday. And I'm wondering, how do we explain Congress's lack of action, Rick?
Well, first, it's hard to explain this because there are emergency funds available that would at least extend the ability to make these payments for a month or so. And the Trump administration is making the argument that this, a shutdown of the government is not an emergency, at least not enough for them to release the funds. And what's kind of hypocritical here is the Trump administration has used emergency to really justify a whole set of activities. The fact that they're not willing to do this in this case, I think is fairly clear why. This is going to put a lot of pressure on Democrats. And even though, if you look at the maps, the highest concentration of SNAP recipients are in states like Texas. And either they think that voters aren't going to care, or that they're going to put more of the blame on Democrats for the shutdown, or the legislators in those states don't care about those voters.
Michael, I'm thinking if feeding hungry people isn't enough to get Congress to act, what would be?
I mean, it's a vexing question on a lot of levels, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around. But when you don't want to help feed the people that voted for you, to Rick's point, particularly in the South, I'm not sure how the president or the GOP can live this one down in the long term, right? This is going to be a haunting Halloween, haunting talking point that is going to get tons of mileage down the road by Democrats, independents, and some libertarians. And the president, I'm sure, may not know that his polling is dropping like a broken elevator on this issue, right? And by all appearances, he's looking the other way. On the other hand, we have Governor Hochul stepping up with state funding for this state, even for the people that did not vote for her. And for me, that's pure political maturity and what a public servant is supposed to do in times of crisis. She's a governor for all of New York State, even for those who won't admit it. She's a model for putting people before politics, and I salute her for that.
Good in New York, Aaron, but there's lots of governors that aren't going to do this.
Absolutely. So basically, the USDA has said it is not going to pay for the SNAP benefits that 3 million New Yorkers depend on. It's $8 billion monthly across the entire United States, about 600 some odd million in New York State. And governors of states can step up, and Governor Hochul has stepped up, but with an initial pledge of 42 million, that covers a few days of the need. These are your neighbors. 1 in 5 people in Onondaga County relies on SNAP benefits. These are you. And I think actually what we're going to see from this is that SNAP is going to snap the shutdown. I think you're going to see moderate Democrats in the Senate be too afraid of the consequences of this, and they're going to vote with the Republicans to reopen the government. I really do think that this is the crisis that's going to move the needle on the shutdown. Yeah. The question is, what are the political ramifications of that and how that plays out? There's been a nuclear option that was just multiple nuclear options dropped from President Trump. We'll talk about that in a second. But one of those was a call to end the filibuster in the Senate over this issue right now. That news just came out in the last day. And I think the political ramifications of this brinksmanship are still really murky, but the people that are going to suffer are your neighbors and you.
But Aaron, you think Democrats are going to cave on this at the same time that the costs of health care under Obamacare have been released, and those are going to go through the roof. And that was what Democrats were saying they needed to see, some agreement on extending the subsidies before they would sign off on a budget. You think they're going to leave that now? I
think a handful of the moderate Democrats are too sick of the shutdown and they want to move forward. It's not Democrats as a whole. It's just a handful of senators are going to get to that 60-vote majority. Either that or maybe we do lose the filibuster. I doubt that's going to happen. I think the Democrats are a handful of moderate Democrats will cave on this.
What do you think, Michael?
Both sides are going to be hurt in different ways down the road. This is not going to be a winner-take-all sort of thing coming in next week. Both sides are going to be hurt in different ways.
And people whose SNAP cards don't work on next week, they're the ones that are actually going to be hurt and who we should be talking about and thinking about here.
Yeah. Michael, tell us more.
Well, I think there's a history to when you talk about food subsidies, SNAPs, and all that sort of thing. I remember Bill Clinton a long time ago redid the SNAP program, coming out of the Reagan iconography about welfare queens and big black bucks getting vodka and steaks and all that. So it has a history to that I think Democrats are very sensitive to, and I think that they latch onto that issue in that way, even though sometimes they may not publicly talk about it, right? So, but we'll see. I think by next Wednesday, to Aaron's point, we'll know something.
People need to be reminded, though, that 40% of the recipients are children, 18% elderly, and 11% are disabled. The idea of the able-bodied individual who's receiving these benefits makes up less than 10% of this population. So this argument that we're cutting something that has all this waste or undeserving people is really a myth.
It's really interesting. Josh Hawley, who's a very conservative Republican senator from Missouri, recently called for, if we can't break the shutdown, let's at least pass a separate bill to continue funding food stamps, given how many people in Missouri rely on SNAP benefits. So this is messy and ugly politics, and I think as Michael said, next week we're going to see where this resolves to and what happens from there.
Let me just note that there is a case pending which a judge could come out on Friday and say that the government does need to open up that emergency reserve, but then also that judge could be overruled, and even if she wants that, to figure it out is going to take several days to get that money to people. So the news may have caught up with us before you viewers see this show. But let me move us on to our last topic. The president is back from a 6-day trip to Asia. He met with leaders of China, Malaysia, Japan, among others. And those controversial talks were with China's Xi Jinping. The two agreed to lower tariffs. The U.S. gets more soybeans, gets to buy more rare earth minerals, and hopefully less fentanyl coming to our shores. On the other hand, China can buy oil and gas from Alaska, gets new business with some U.S. companies. Michael, how significant is this agreement?
The Asia trip, also known as the Fix What You Broke tour, but I'm sure most Americans are slightly relieved about what's happening right now, because up to this point, it's all been pomp and circumstance, right? It's all been sort of public theater, state dinners, and promises, political innuendo. There are all those Sunday show appearances by the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, using big words like a framework and building blocks and things will be set in motion. All these empty sort of word salads at the time that had no tangible meaning to everyday folk who voted for lower prices. So trying to make political spectacle for 7 months look like penned agreements would only last so long with the American psyche, I think, right? And we're starting to see in broad daylight these sort of cracks in the administration's agenda become talking points among Democrats, some independents, and even some libertarians. But there's this growing cadre of courageous individuals in the GOP who are starting to make some noise. So I think that the next few weeks or so is going to be interesting to see how the GOP is going to sort of mend itself. But hopefully this is the end of the president going around the world fixing things that he broke in the first place.
Aaron, he said, President Trump said it was a 12 on a 10-point scale.
Yeah.
Is this a good agreement? Is there enough substance there, is Michael's questioning?
Caleb Ragland is the American Soybean Association president, and he said this is a meaningful step forward towards reestablishing a stable, long-term trading relationship that delivers results for farm families. Keyword there, reestablishing. We had that just a few months ago, and I do think that one of the things that put pressure on Trump to deliver an agreement so that we can sell 12 million tons of soybeans to China next year was the pressure he's receiving from Midwest Republicans in Senate and elsewhere saying, hey, you need to look out for us. Trump has this sense that his base is driven by the military and by farmers and the heartland, and he knows that he needed to deliver for that, but we didn't get anything new from this. We put tariffs slightly down from where they were in exchange for reestablishing what we were doing before. And just, to kind of counter Mike a little bit, I think there was a lot of pomp and circumstance, a lot of meeting the Emperor of Japan, a lot of gold-plated dinners, and a lot of showmanship for ultimately something that just says we're going to talk each other back from the edge. But in typical President Trump fashion, right as he was going to meet Xi Jinping, he announces that the U.S. will restart nuclear testing of nuclear weapons.
I want to get to that, but first, Rick, you're the
Yes.
economist. What about the tariffs and the deal?
This is all in context. Compared to where we were a month ago, yes, we're better off with this deal. But again, go back to where we were at the beginning of the Trump administration, as both Michael and Aaron said, China's going to start buying soybeans again, not at higher rates, but what they were earlier. Tariffs are down, but not as low as they were at the beginning of the Trump administration. So again, we've walked back from the brink, but this is both China and the Trump administration created problems with. The other word is exaggeration, and you go and just see what he said, Trump said when he was in Japan. He said, all these companies have promised to put in billions of dollars of investments, and then, especially Toyota, $10 billion. And Toyota goes, no, we never said that. Nissan, same thing. So he's making all these big promises. In reality, fixing problems that were made in the first place that didn't have to be problems is how I see this.
I think when you examine the data closely, the rhetoric doesn't meet the reality, because when you look at the metric tonnage that's been promised by China this time, it's almost the exact same metric tonnage from a year ago.
Yep.
So there's more of the rhetoric doesn't meet the reality. It's more pomp and circumstance and braggadocio.
Okay, Aaron, as you said, right before he was going in to talk to Xi Jinping, he says we're going to start nuclear tests again. Was that a negotiation strategy to scare China, to scare
Absolutely.
Russia?
Not to scare Russia, but to just throw people off base, to get the media, it's like throwing this thing to the media that we're all going to suddenly talk about and think about the ramifications of as sort of a distraction, like, hey, you're playing with a cat, and like, there's the cat toy, go look at it, and start batting around for a while. I don't think there's a lot behind it, and apparently it caught a lot of his advisors off guard, which makes me think, yeah, it really was just a negotiating tactic. Try to throw the world off base when we meet with China so he can claim this victory. I think the real question is, does anything come of this, right? We stopped testing nuclear weapons a long time ago for a whole host of incredibly good reasons. But this is the new normal of things that we thought were sort of structures in our geopolitical and our government systems can be just swept out from under us, like pulling out a rug in a second, and we're going to see a lot more of that. Notably, he did not meet with the leader of a country that does have nuclear weapons, Kim Jong-un, despite saying that he was planning to. So I think North Korea is a place to watch in the geopolitics of all of this. Was kind of on the sidelines of this entire Asia tour.
Rick, it's hard to know whether he meant test the missiles or really do explosives, and it's all done on computer now, right?
Whether this was a trial balloon or just another one of these ideas that pops into his head at the moment, who knows? I certainly am not going to be able to second guess what motivations there were behind that statement.
Change the shiny object every time.
Okay.
Switch the shiny object.
Well, Michael, it's time for many people's favorite segment. And this time I'm going to morph our F's into whatever was scary in the news this week. So what's your
My
F
F
scare?
goes to Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, for doing absolutely nothing. He's a prototype for political self-preservation.
And Rick?
My F goes to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. Last week, the province of Canada ran a TV ad that I'm sure many of you saw of Ronald Reagan stating that tariffs were harmful to consumers and a country's economic growth. Donald Trump then said the ad was a fake and that Ronald Reagan loved tariffs. So what did the foundation, whose goal is to protect the legacy of Ronald Reagan, what did they do? Well, they accused Ontario of misrepresenting Reagan and threatened to sue without ever mentioning Trump's ridiculous claim that Reagan loved tariffs. Reagan was a strong supporter of free trade, and the board of his foundation have failed in their goal of protecting his legacy and should resign.
Aaron?
My F goes to the real monster that's coming back from the dead, measles. After being measles-free 2 decades ago, measles making a comeback, 1,500 cases, deaths, kids getting sick around the country. Thanks to vaccination, we had eliminated this disease in the United States in 2000, but thanks to vaccine hesitancy, we now have sick kids and death, a real scary Halloween for some families.
Okay, give us a treat, Michael. What's
My
good?
A goes to air traffic controllers, specifically those who come to work without pay going into the holiday season.
And it's everybody's wondering what it's going to be. I know I'm traveling for Thanksgiving, and I'm thinking, oh my. Rick?
My A goes to Republican Senators Rand Paul, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitch McConnell for voting with Democrats on a resolution terminating the national emergency declared to impose global tariffs. Seldom have Republicans been willing to stand up and directly confront Trump's power grabs. Now, this has no chance of being brought up in the House of Representatives, but it is encouraging to see some Republicans voting against some of the Trump actions.
And Aaron.
Well, like Michael, my A is going to stick with aviation, and it goes to Frank Marks, a retired hurricane hunter from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who is now volunteering his time to fill in the gaps caused by the double whammy of Trump's cuts to the workforce at NOAA and the government shutdown. The forecast of devastating Hurricane Melissa, which has wreaked havoc in Jamaica and across the Caribbean, the forecast was really spot on because of the work of these volunteers adding their extra time to fill in the gaps from the cuts. This did help save lives. Thanks, Dr. Marks, and thanks to all the volunteers.
So I didn't realize they're all volunteer pilots.
There are a
Not
lot
all,
of people
but a lot of
coming
them.
in and filling in the gaps, not just flying the planes. He gets a lot of the notoriety because he's out there doing the hurricane hunting, but behind the scenes in running the models. We need those volunteers because we've lost them.
Well, thank you for watching tonight. We'd be glad to hear your comments on this discussion or your ideas for other topics. The addresses will be on your screen. Remember, the show airs Fridays at 8, Saturdays at 5:30, or stream anytime at WCNY.org. Good night.
This program is brought to you by the members of WCNY. Thank you.